Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. My name's Andy Rogers, Senior Director of Marketing and Partnerships with Libsyn. Just a quick reminder, today's session is the Apple Podcast Connect, and joining us today is Dave Jackson, who's part of our marketing and support team here at Libsyn. He's been a podcaster since 2005, and you've probably heard of his podcast, The School of Podcasting, which has nearly 3 million downloads to date. So some of the things that Dave is going to cover today are just overall podcast management, some Apple reporting and Libsyn Stats, how your published content gets to your audience, and some highlights around Libsyn 5. So with that, Dave, I'll turn it over to you.
Awesome. Glad to be here. We're going to jump right in. And there we go. Awesome. So we're going to start kind of from ground zero. And we're going to start off with podcast mechanics. Let's just figure out, how does Libsyn work with Apple? And so when you create an episode in Libsyn, that has your title and all your descriptions and your artwork and your media, and all that information is pushed into one file called your feed. In fact, if you're ever in Google, like Google Chrome, and you click on that, you will get a face full of code, and you're going to think it's broken, but that's just the way it works. And you're like, well, what do we do with all that gobbledygook? Well, we stick it into an app. And today we're talking about Apple Podcast app. And those apps decipher all that gobbledygook and turn it into something that we can read. And when we click on a play button, it knows that, hey, there's a file over here. And so as we look at this little workflow that's on the screen, and I just want to make sure we are sharing my screen, because on this side of the fence, we're not. Okay. Because I'm looking at this going, hey, it was here a minute ago. That's why I asked. Let's do this again. There we go. Now we can see it. Okay, good. So down here, we've got Libsyn. Libsyn feeds into an RSS feed, and the RSS feed feeds into Apple Podcasts. So if we look at this, and I'm seeing now, everybody's like, yes, it's sharing or it's not sharing. Before we move on, yes, John says yay. Thank you, John. So if I look at this and I see a typo in Apple Podcasts, would I go to Apple Podcast to fix that? And the answer is, well, no, because if you look at this, Apple Podcast doesn't have anything. In fact, Apple Podcast is just a mirror of whatever's in your Libsyn account. So if I have a problem, I have a typo, I want to fix something, I go to Libsyn to fix it. In fact, Libsyn is actually short for liberated syndication. So we are syndicating all of your changes out to Apple as well as the other directories. So what I want to do, I like to take things that we understand, get that concept, and move it into podcasting. So we're gonna take a quick, like, 45-second tangent here. Right now, Squid Game is super popular on Netflix. And so let's say I'm at my house, I got my Wi-Fi going, and I've got my Android phone, and sure enough, I can watch Netflix and I can watch Squid Game there. And I go over to my iPhone, and sure enough, streaming Netflix. And then I go over to a tablet, and that one works. And then I go to this last tablet, and for whatever reason, I can't get Netflix to work on this thing. Well, is it the Wi-Fi? No, it's not, because if it was the Wi-Fi, well, then none of these would work, right? And is it Netflix? Well, no, because Netflix works on some of these. So it's not the Wi-Fi, it's not Netflix. There's something wrong with this tablet. And you're like, Dave, I thought we were here to talk about podcasting. All right, let's put this into podcasting. If you put your episodes and you publish them in Libsyn, goes out to your RSS feed, and you see it in Apple Podcasts and you see it in Spotify, but for whatever reason you go to Google Podcasts and that episode is not there, is it Libsyn? No, because if it was Libsyn, it wouldn't be in Apple or Spotify. So keep this in mind, that as you're publishing your episodes and it's going out to all the different apps update at different intervals. In fact, the worst case scenario is 24 hours. That is typically, thank goodness, not the case. But in some cases, if those apps are having a bad day, it might take 24 hours for your episode to show up. So keep that in mind as you go along, and we're syndicating things out. Another fun thing with Apple, and we're going to point out some things. We love Apple and everything they've done for podcasting, but there are times that they do things that we go, that's just different. And you go, why? And you go, that's the way Apple does it. So here's one. If you're looking at Apple Podcast app, there are two views, and you can see I've got that little arrow pointing at the search view. And this is where you've pulled up the app, you're trying to find a new show, and of course you're looking for the feed from Libsyn, and you'll see where you found it. And at the top, there's this little itty bitty plus sign now. This used to be called the subscribe button. It's now called the follow button. So you want to start telling people, follow me in Apple Podcast. Also notice that the background is kind of grayish. And down here, we have a whole lot of 0 when it comes to episode numbers. And the reason I have this is store/search view, because down here, you'll see what just says search. If you're on a actual PC, you can still use Apple iTunes. That's the only time where the word iTunes kind of makes sense, is if you're on a PC. But for today, we're just going to call it Apple Podcasts. Well, the other view is somebody comes up, they click on your little plus sign, and they follow your show. This is what happens. Now I can go to the library view, and you're like, hey, the background turned to this dark thing. Yep, it did. Is that a setting in Libsyn? Nope, that is all Apple. And you know they love pretty stuff. Now what was a little plus sign is now a check mark showing you that you have followed the show, and I'm in the library, and lo and behold, we grew some episode numbers. Now, did somebody make a mistake where they forgot to put episode numbers in some place and another place? Nope. You'll see when we get into Libsyn, when you put the information in there, this is just the way Apple displays it. So for the record, I always recommend that you follow your own show and look at it in the library. That's typically the most up-to-date view. But there are two different views of Apple that, display things slightly different, and that's just the way it is. All right, I want to talk a little bit, just briefly, about Libsyn 4 and Libsyn 5, and I always use the analogy of your high school gym. If you think about it, if you go back to your high school gymnasium, it had front doors, probably had a couple doors on the side, maybe one door in the back. And what I'm hearing working in the support area is, I don't want to migrate to Libsyn 5 yet. I'm not ready to move. And I'm just here to let you know that you can use Libsyn 4 and Libsyn 5 both at the same time. There are features in 4 that haven't been migrated to 5, and there are brand new features in Libsyn 5 that are not in Libsyn 4 because they're new. And so if you're in Libsyn 4, you've got a link right at the top that says sign in here to Libsyn 5. And when you're in Libsyn 5, there's this cute little question mark in the bottom right-hand corner that's always there. And you can see where you can switch back to Libsyn 4. So you can always use both. Don't think that it has to be one or the other. And so let's talk artwork. Artwork is super important in Apple Podcasts. And what I mean by this is a spec. This is not a, hey, your artwork should be. This is your artwork needs to be this way. In fact, if your artwork doesn't meet this, you probably won't be listed. And there are places like Spotify, when you go to add that destination, it will just flat out tell you, hey, your artwork is wrong. And so it can be as small as 1400 by 1400 pixels. It can go all the way up to 3000 by 3000. But the key here is it has to be under 500 kilobytes. So you could actually have, the right dimensions, but if depending on what's in the image, sometimes the file will get bigger and bigger and bigger. And you just really need it to be under 500 kilobytes. When it's over that, what happens is when Apple goes to update your show, in some cases, it's taking so much time to kind of double check your artwork that it times out and it won't update your show. So that's a key to that. You will see that one line there where it says use RGB color space. And you're like, ooh, I don't know how to do that. The good news is, like every single app, that's almost the default. You don't have to really think about that. And then they want it to be in a JPEG, JPEG, or a PNG file. I typically use JPEG. Try one or the other, play around. This is the key one again, that under 500 kilobytes can really kind of come back and haunt you. If for some reason you get your artwork from a graphic artist and you're like, hey, this isn't the right size, or it's too large in the file size, there's a great free app from Google. You can find that at squoosh.app, and Squoosh is SQUOOSH.app. And when you go there, you can see this is what it looks like. You just drag your artwork there. And if for some reason you need to resize it, you just click on this resize button. And it's super easy. You type in the dimensions you want it to be. If for some reason it was a little taller than it was wide and it's not perfectly square, you can say, look, don't maintain the aspect ratio because I need this to be square. And then it's super easy. Down here, you just have this little slider and you just slide it until this is under 500 kilobytes. And when you hit that, you are good to go. And you can click on the little down arrow here and it will download the new version of your artwork. Super simple to get that in the event that you get it, the wrong spec. When you're updating your artwork, you need to do some things. And number one is, you'll see here, I've got two images here. And this one I'm just kind of saying was SOP logo number one. Well, if I update to a new image, I don't want to name it SOP logo one .jpeg again, because from Apple's kind of robot perspective, when they scan your website, they're going to see that as the exact same file. So when you update your artwork, you want to use a new file name. Keep that in mind. And again, once you update that, if it meets your spec, give it 24 hours and you should see it update in Apple. Now, we do have a great tool in Libsyn 5, and that is it now integrates with Canva. And I just went over to Canva and took this quick screenshot. Number one, you can see here in the upper left-hand corner, you can create a blank podcast cover, but they have, you'll see here in the upper right-hand corner, 125 different templates that you can pick from. And let's say I wanted to use this daily motivation. I could click here and choose a different font. These are just starting spots, all these templates. You can do whatever you want there, but this is now, you can actually jump right from Libsyn 5 into Canva, make your artwork, and when you save it, it goes right back to Libsyn 5. It's very, very cool. And if you haven't played with Canva yet, it's free. They have a pro plan that has a few more features, but Canva is a really cool tool. I use this on a daily basis. So, all right, episodic artwork. We're back to those things that sometimes make you scratch your head. You can make, there's show artwork, and we'll see this when we jump into Libsyn in just a second. And then there's also artwork that you can do for your episode. And so right now we're looking at episode 203 of the feed in Apple Podcast. And you'll notice where it's using the show's artwork, even though they have episodic artwork. They kind of have this cool template, and it looks like this. Now, what am I looking at is I'm looking at Apple, kind of their web-based version of Apple Podcasts. And you can see not only does it show the artwork, but it doesn't in the app. Now you're like, well, why is that? Again, that's just an Apple thing. So Apple doesn't show episodic artwork in their app or in iTunes for that matter, but it does show it on the web. Also notice, again, just a head scratcher, in the app, when I'm in the library, remember that, it'll show the episode number. It won't on the web-based version. That's just the way it is. And as long as we know these, then we're fine and we don't have to think something is wrong. So keep that in mind. Now, the great thing is, even though Apple Podcasts does not show episodic artwork, Amazon/Audible does, Spotify does, a number of apps do. And so you don't have to create, separate artwork for that. It does. Again, you can do that in Canva if you want to. We just want to make sure you are aware that in Apple Podcasts, if you're like, hey, the artwork isn't showing up for the episode, it's just not going to. All right, so let's look at some Libsyn info. Let me switch over here and we will jump in and start playing. So I am going to jump into Libsyn 5. Now that address is just 5.libsyn.com. And if you're wondering what the old version is, you guessed it, it was 4.libsyn.com. And so the first thing I want to show you is, since we're talking about the information that goes into Apple, there are three things. One is the name of your show. The second one is the title of your episodes. And the third one is the author field. So here in Libsyn 5, I'm on the dashboard, and down here in the bottom left-hand corner, you have this little gear and it says settings. And when I click on that, what most of these settings are things that you do once. You kind of come in and you put it in and you adjust it and upload your artwork and you click save. And that's why it's not out on the dashboard. Most of this stuff you're going to kind of do once and really maybe never mess with it again. You can always change it. I'm going to go here to podcast settings. And so this is the feed. Well, you know what? I don't really want to play with the feed right now. We're going to play with the feed in just a second when we get to stats. So what I'm going to do is switch over to a fake show that I made called the Pygmy Pony Podcast. So here again, to get to where I want, if I go to settings and podcast settings, There we go. So you have your show slug. That is really just your Libsyn ID. In fact, if you ever have to put in a support ticket, or if you have a question on support, we're always happy to, help you. If you throw in your show slug, you can look up your information that much quicker. But here you can see I've got my show title. So I've got that. For the record, you don't really need the word podcast in your title. You can put it in there. Keep this in mind that as we get into things like descriptions and things like that, it's always your show. And you can always do with whatever you want in your show. But in the same way that I don't say, I'm going to go watch the Great Time to Die movie James Bond, you don't really need to say Pygmy Pony Podcast. I could just call this Pygmy Ponies maybe. Your subtitle is here. This is a feature that isn't really used a whole lot, but it's still used somewhere. Otherwise, it wouldn't be here, and I'll explain that in just a second. Your show description is something that, think about, you have your target audience has found you. This is somebody who loves Pygmy Ponies. What am I going to say to let them know this show is for them? So you want it to describe, hey, here's what to expect. In the Pygmy Pony Show, we talk about pygmy ponies and how they're great and how they're wonderful. They're little tiny ponies. You should click here, et cetera, et cetera. Over here, you have your artwork that we just talked about. And if I scroll down a little more, if you're going to be exporting from Libsyn to YouTube, you can upload a wide image for that. On the left-hand side, you've got 2 categories, and you might be going, hey, in Libsyn 4, there were 3. That's an Apple thing. Now they're saying we don't need 3 categories. We just need 2. And so depending on what your show is about, you have a giant, much bigger list than used to in Apple for your categories. Now, if you look at this and go, Dave, this doesn't really fit my show. I understand that. That has been the case really since the dawn of podcasting. In that case, find the one that fits your show the closest and go from there. Now, if you have the ability, like here in business, you'll see where there is business careers, business investing, things of that. If you can choose one of these, I guess we'll call it a subcategory, do that. If I were to pick business investing, my show would be listed in the business category and in the business investing category. So you're kind of getting 2 categories for the price of one when you pick a subcategory. So you can pick your 2 categories here. The owner name is you. There's your email. The author, typically, and I'm going to fix this, is your name, because we said that is one of the features that Apple is looking at. They're looking at the title of your show. So that's up here. The title of your episodes, which we'll do in a second, and then the author field. Now, if you have your own website, you want to put that here by default, because when you sign up at Libsyn, we don't know if you have a website or not. So we're going to put in your Libsyn podcast page there, because without a website, your feed might be invalid. So we're going to put something there for you. If you have your own website, you definitely want to go in and update that to your website, because in Apple Podcast, there is a link for the show's website. So if you're trying to drive traffic back to your website, you would put your website there. Under show type, there's episodic, which I just call normal, means you can listen to the first episode, the 17th, the 27th, whatever you want. If you're doing kind of maybe a drama, and you should listen from episode 1 and then 2 and then 3, you would switch that to serial. If your content rating is clean or not, and I simply go by the rule, if you have to ask, is this clean? It's probably not. The fun thing is that's never really been defined by Apple, and they won't. So that's the way it works. You set your language and your copyright, and that is really all the information you need. And again, here's your link to Canva. So if you wanted to design your artwork, it takes you right there. It's super easy. When you save it, it comes right back to Libsyn. So again, this was under settings and then your podcast settings. And typically you do this once. Now, if for some reason, and you'll see when I click on save there, we get the success message. And if I want, I can go back to my dashboard, which is just right here in the upper left-hand corner. Now, what happens if I do this and then later I go, oh, that description is horrible? You can always go back to settings, podcast settings, and update. Keep this in mind. My little catchphrase for this is your podcast is a recipe. It's not a statue. You can tweak it anytime you want. So we've seen there where we put in the title of our podcast and our author. Now I'm going to go up in the upper right-hand corner and click on new episode just to show you where the information that Apple uses comes from. So I click on new episode. This screen comes up. And remember I said it looks at the show title and the author name and the episode title. Here is the episode title. So what I can say, what I see, think about this. This is like lakefront property. This is the stuff I've seen people triple their downloads by changing their episode title. And you go, really? What was their original title? Well, this is the fake Pygmy Pony podcast. And if I put Pygmy Pony podcast episode 16, does that make you want to click on it? Like, oh, I can't wait to see what's in episode 16. But if I said, Pygmy Pony podcast, Andy sells pony for $5 million. Somebody's like, wait, somebody sold a pony for $5 million? I got to see that. Think of this like it was, I don't know, the 1920s or 30s with those little newsboys out front screaming, extra, extra, read all about it. Your episode title, when they're looking at your show in Apple Podcasts, first, they see you before they hear you. So they're going to see your artwork, then they're going to read their description, and it's the title. Those titles might go, oh, this looks like it's exactly for me. So I'm just going to put in here, just because we're playing, eye-catching title, almost clickbaity, but we don't want to do that. Your description is the description of your show. A lot of people call this show notes. That's fine. And typically what people want in show notes are anything that is clickable. So if I mention that, I don't know, Elsie Escobar has a book, I don't know if she does it. I don't think she does. She should. But I could have a link to that. Anything that I mention in my show, typically your audience is looking for, and you want kind of a paragraph to basically let them know, here's what to expect. We do have snippets in Libsyn 5. So if you type the same thing over and over and over, I just made up a fake one this morning. And if I click on this, you'll see where, oops, I clicked one too many times there. You can see that this information just came in, and you can make those yourself. So if you have a sponsor, or if you have anything, hey, click here to join my newsletter, I could just type in whatever I want, and I'll just type in some gibberish because it's fun. And I'll call this newsletter. Snippets are my new favorite, best thing ever. And now if I come in here and say, here's where I notice we got the success link there. If I come in here, let's say I want the newsletter before. Oh, got to get rid of my snippets. Here we go. So let's say I want that gibberish that I just put. I can click here and say, put the newsletter gibberish, and there it is. So it's simply, hey, when I click on this, you type that. So anything you type over and over and over is there. I can upload my media file here. Here again is the artwork with a link to Canva. So you can do that. The general category here is if you're using the Libsyn podcast page. This is not the category for Apple. We already did that. That was under settings and then under podcast settings. So this is if you're using the Libsyn podcast page, you can actually set your kind of a category for each episode. Tags are used by YouTube, so you could put those in here. And again, if you have your own website, this is where this really comes in handy, the permalink. And you'll see where right now it's set to point to the media file. You can have it point to the Libsyn podcast page that's referred to here as the show's blog page. Or if you have your own website, you could come here and type the full length to your website. So again, when people are listening to the show and it says, for more information, click the web page, your link will automatically be there in Apple Podcasts. You'll notice that when I typed eye-catching title clickbaity up here, it automatically filled it in down here in Libsyn 5. It does that for you. I'm just going to change this back to show's blog page, and I'm not actually going to make an episode. I'm just showing you where this information is. Now here is another author field. And this is where you would want to put your name if you're the host. And then if you interview people, you would put a comma. So if I go, maybe I interview Rob. So Dave Jackson, comma, Rob Walsh. You would want to put that there because why? That's one of the fields that Apple searches. So if somebody goes, oh, I need to talk to Rob Walsh. I don't know if has he ever been on a podcast? Not only will the feed come up, but your show will come up because you have Rob Walsh as an author. And I realized that when you see that, you're like, oh, hold on. What if I go Rob Walsh / Zig Ziglar / John Lee Dumas / really famous people? No, when you spam those, we've seen Apple actually remove shows because you're just obviously spamming things. If your episode is a full episode or a trailer or a bonus, that's there. You have your season number, your episode number. So before, when we were looking at the different views, if I said, hey, this is episode 23, in the store view, that wouldn't show up. But after I follow the show, that would. So keep that in mind. That's, again, as long as this is here, it will show up in the library view. And then you have your rating again. Before, the rating was for the show. This is for the episode. So keep that in mind. And then when do you want to publish? Do you want to publish now, or do you want to, schedule this for the future? So we talked about the different information. This is the title, again, that can really, at the end, I'll give you a resource that you can use to help you shape your title. I cannot stress enough how important your title is to your episode. It can really make people click. And once they click and start to listen, they're really going to love your information, but we got to get them to click. And saying Pygmy Pony Podcast episode 12 is not going to get them to click. So I'm just going to put this as, here, let me upload a file here real quick. I'm just going to click on this. We'll upload a quick MP3. Off it goes, and you'll see the little progress bar go across the top, and then it gives me a success message here, and there it is. So now I'm just going to say, hey, I'm just playing. I'm going to save that as a draft. And I'm going to go ahead and click on save. So again, that was all we did, whatever page you're on in Libsyn 5. So if I go back to my dashboard, you've always got that new episode link in the upper right-hand corner. So we started off by putting in our show's information under settings and podcast settings, and then we made the new episode. Now we're going to jump into Libsyn Stats, and then we're going to... Yeah.
Can we pause for just a comment and a question?
Sure.
If you can go to the previous screen. One thing I did want to point out when you look at episode title and description, and you had mentioned this before about following your own podcast, but look at how your titles appear. A lot of times you'll see, today I'm going to interview the most interesting podcaster there is, Dave Jackson. If Dave Jackson's name is the hook, that really should be the front of that sentence, because
yes,
the more characters that appear, the more the message is going to get truncated. And I know we're talking about Apple today, but there are different character limitations for different platforms. So just something to think about. And there are a couple of questions in the chat about artwork as well. And I would say, looking at your own artwork in an app, especially in Apple Podcasts or in Spotify, check all of them. Look at how that artwork appears. I think one thing you might see a lot is beautiful cover art on your computer, but then when you really shrink it down to a 1400 by 1400, it can be very difficult to see smaller images or smaller words. The couple questions I had in the chat were regarding the description area.
Yeah,
that's a great one. Is it bad to put affiliate links directly in the description area? And two, someone else had thought that when you did put links in, that Apple would reject the episode.
I've never heard that. No, there is one thing that's different in Libsyn 5 than in Libsyn 4. You'll notice there's no Apple summary. And sometimes you're like, hey, I see people with really long show notes, but when I go into Apple, they're short. There used to be an Apple summary that you would see kind of in the Apple area. And that did have a limit. Apple introduced this field. It was supposed to be maybe a sentence or two. And that's why it had, I think it was 255 characters, maybe longer than that, 500 and something. Apple has realized that just confused everyone, and they got rid of it. That's why it's in 4. But it's not in 5. It's just something that confused people. So your description can be, I'm sure there's a limit somewhere, a couple of thousand, whatever characters. But no, you can put links. A lot of people, instead of putting like a really long affiliate link, what you can do is say something like, click here for more, and then you can highlight it. And then you have this 3 little dot kind of option here, which will give you more tools. And you'll see that one of these tools looks like a little chain link fence. And if I click on that, I could say, hey, go to libsyn.com or whatever it is you're linking to. So this is where you could put the affiliate link. And then also, this is sometimes called alt text. So you always want to put that in for our friends that are sight impaired. And so I could say, hey, while I'm at it, open this in a new window. And so now we've got a link, as opposed to this really long, crazy HTML link that sometimes gets people thinking, huh? So,
and there's also the option of using shortened URLs, like
sure.
Bitly is a great example, because then you can actually track the click-throughs and get an idea of who's clicking on what and follow that track.
Yeah. Where Apple doesn't like links is in your show's description. So here you are, somebody's come to Apple Podcast, they're reading about your great show, and it's like, oh, by the way, go to my website over here. Apple is not, they won't reject you. They're just like, look, we just got them here. Don't send them away already. But once they've subscribed and follow, you're allowed to have links in your actual episodes, and these will work. If you put links in your show's description, they're not clickable. So keep that in mind. Any other things before we keep moving? All right, so let's jump over to stats, and then we'll jump into Podcast Connect, because there are some things you can see. Now notice Libsyn 5 is letting me know, hey, Dave, you didn't save your changes. Are you sure we're going to lose these? And since I'm just playing, I'm going to say, yes, I don't need to save these, and it'll go away, and it will take me over. I'm going to click on statistics here on the left-hand side. It's the third option. And so you get all these cool boxes that kind of, first of all, let me go back to the feed so we can have something that actually has stats. And you'll get to see things like your all-time downloads, how many downloads you had this week, and how many downloads you had for the month and this year, and all this other fun things are right there at the top. And what's great about this, if we scroll down, this is new in Libsyn 5. It shows your last 5 downloads, and you'll see at the bottom, this is new. If you haven't peeked at Libsyn 5, we now give you how many downloads did you get after the first 7 days of being released. Some people like to look at that as how many super fans are listening, right? The people that maybe subscribed or followed. So I can turn these off if I want. I can actually just say, let me just look at the total number of downloads, or if I just want to compare the first 7 days maybe. And you can see in the case of the feed, they're real consistent right out of the door. They get a ton of downloads. So that's a fun little kind of graph that you can play with to see how things are going. Down here, you've got your episode totals. And again, here's your column for first 7 days, first 30 days. This is great if you're trying to get advertising, and then first 90 days. And then you have your totals at the end. Here, you'll notice where we have this little dotted line. And that's because if I change the date range here, it will affect everything beneath that line. So everything above is fine, but all the other stats that are here, so I have my daily, and I'll show you monthly, all these stats down here are going to be affected by whatever date range I have here. So the first thing I want to show, you'll see where I have a daily. We're looking at a daily graph here, is if you put your mouse over this little ball here, and you get kind of the little weird number 1 finger, when I click on this, it actually opens up a new screen, and it shows me, hey, I had X amount of downloads that day. Where the heck did they come from? So you can see here, this was probably a day that they published the feed. They got 631 downloads that day, but also it's downloads of your back catalog. And so this is where, if I switch over to maybe another page here, you'll see where once it gets done thinking about it, people are downloading your back catalog. And so that's really a really handy tool. I'm going to switch this here to monthly, and then up here under my date range picker, I'm just going to say, hey, show me this year, which is also kind of a new feature, not so much selecting dates, but the new date picker. And so you can see here are my monthly stats. And this is where I always tell people monthly stats are just a great indicator of how your back catalog is doing. Because realize, I know for me, I did some math. I think 60% of the downloads that happen in a month are from episodes that were not released that month. It's all my back catalog. So you've got that. If we scroll down here, you've got where in the world is my audience coming from, and I can click on the United States here. and it will kind of break it down by states. And if I wanted to, I can actually click on markets, and it'll have to think about it a second. But this is great. If I'm a comedian and I want to go on tour, these are the places that are probably going to sell out the quickest. So it comes in really handy. If we scroll down a little more, you'll see here you have your downloads by destination. So these are the destinations that you've set up. So this is, and you'll notice that Apple Podcast isn't on there. Apple, Google, and Stitcher do not require any additional information. They just need a good old standard RSS feed. So consequently, there is no app. You just submit it to Apple, and once you're approved, it's in there. But you have your destinations over here, and then user agent is kind of a fancy word for what app are people using. So you can see here, there's Pocket Cast, there's Podcast Addict, there's Apple Podcasts here near the top. So that's there as well. But some of the features that we can't see is how far did people listen. And so that's where having Apple Podcasts really comes into play. So let's go back quickly here before we jump into Podcast Connect. I just want to explain what we're looking at. And so you'll see here, there is listeners, there's engaged listeners and plays. And this is kind of just an overview shot of your dashboard when you log in. And you're like, well, what's the difference between a listener and a play? And what the heck is an engaged listener? And so listeners are basically the total number of people that listen to your show. So when it comes down to listeners or plays, I'm kind of voting, I'm going to be looking at listeners. Plays are the total number of times people pressed play on your episode, which depending on the scenario could be useful. The engaged listener is the number of unique devices that played at least 20 minutes or 40% of an episode within a single session. So these are people that are just clicking and they're listening for a majority of your show here, at least. And it says pausing or stopping an episode does not count as starting a new session. So either at least 20 minutes or 40% of an episode within a single session is an engaged listener. And then last, average consumption. How much of an episode is consumed by listeners on average? So I'm going to switch back here to, or I'm going to bring over Podcast Connect. So this is actually a live screen of Podcast Connect. And we basically just see the screen I looked at. So here's some fun things that you can do. Number one, you can see here, again, here's that average consumption. And that's the one that for me that I'm really looking at. So especially if I'm putting all my ads at the end of the show and I can see that nobody's getting there because they're dropping out about 80%, it's like, then this is why if you do advertising, if you ever wonder why a mid-roll ad is the most expensive, that's why, because people are making it. A lot of times they'll skip the beginning, they might skip the end, but mid-rolls are there. So you've got that consumption. And keep in mind, when we're looking at listeners, you're like, wait, how did I get down to 372? These are only people listening in Apple Podcasts. This is not, where in Libsyn, you're looking at stats for everybody in whatever app they're using, whatever website they're using. If somebody clicked on play and they listened to at least a minute of your show, in Libsyn, it counts as a download. Here at Apple, it's only Apple devices. So don't, it's really easy to look at this and go, wait, where'd all my downloads go? This is just Apple, people. So, and this is, the address is podcasts with an S, podcastconnect.apple.com. And then you just log in with your Apple ID. So some things under trends. So the overview kind of gave us a quick snapshot of all of these, the different trends, your different episodes and your performance. So here I'm looking at listeners by episode. And so again, it kind of gives me a breakdown of this, and you can see your dates and things of that nature. And you can look at other things. There's by episode or by country or by city. And I think you can also look at listeners versus plays versus timed listen. But when you get to episodes, this is, to me, my favorite screen, because it's really, I can see here, okay, again, how many people were listeners? That's how many people actually listened. And then over here, I'm really concentrating on that percentage. And what's great about this is I'm actually kind of looking at this going, wow, these, for me, if on YouTube, if you get to 50% on YouTube, you're a rock star. and I'm up here in the 80% range. So I'm pretty happy with this, but I have one here that's 83%. So what's great about this, if I put my mouse over the episode that you want to dive into, I can see this was 32 minutes long. And if I click on that, it brings this up. And what this graph represents are listeners. And you can see I started off here with 402. And sometimes you kind of go, wait, why did I lose so many in the first minute? And those are the people that maybe clicked listen in an app, or they just, for whatever reason, they didn't stick around. And in some cases, you will see kind of a dip. In fact, you see here, I have 4 that are kind of a dip for about the first minute. There are people that know the beginning of your show, especially if it's always the same thing, and they will just skip it. So you might see like a quick dip for the first minute of your show because they know that it's the feed and yada, 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 and LC, etc. But as you go along, you can see, now this one's there's a little dip here, see ever so slightly. And my guess, if I click here, now you're not going to be able to hear this, but if I click on play, yep, that's a sponsor. That is, so if you ever wonder if people fast forward through sponsors, not all of them, but some of them do. I started off here at 261, and at the end of the sponsorship, I had lost a few. But that's what you can see here. So if all of a sudden, this is actually fairly steady, but I've seen some episodes where you'll have a sizable dip, and that's where you want to go back, figure out where it is, and click play and find out, what did I say here that caused people to just dive away? You'll notice here is the ending. The minute you say, hey, thanks so much for tuning in, they're gone. They are out. And again, there are apps now that you can program like, hey, skip the last 2 minutes, because that's where people just start pitching away. So this, for me, is a really handy thing that you can see in Apple Podcast Connect. The last one is performance. And if we click on this, what's kind of handy, and you do have these date ranges. So anything we're looking at is based on a date range. So I can see, the last 60 days or just the last week. And what it's showing here is I'm saying compared to the median, and if you put your mouse over these, I can see the last couple episodes. The median is 50% get more and 50% get less. And so I can see what episodes did good and what episodes maybe didn't work as good as I thought they were going to. And you can also come over here and say, well, compare that to the average, which is, well, the average. We know that one. And so now it shows me I'm my average. And this little line is kind of showing you, when it came out, how many downloads did it get over time. And so I believe these at the bottom are days, and it goes through. So it's just another handy little graph. And you can see here on the right that it's showing you, okay, this one was down 20% compared to, I guess, in this case, the average, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a way to do that. And some of these, now not this particular screen, will have a button where you can download this information as like a CSV. You can, if you kind of drag your mouse over this, you can copy it and paste it into Excel if you want to do some further number crunching or run a report or things of that nature. But it's really handy. These are stats that they're based on the fact, because it's an Apple Podcast can track how far people listen and things of that nature. And the one thing you still might be saying is, hey, where do I get how much information? Like how many people are male, how many people are, over the age of this or that. That information is not an Apple Podcast. That you would have to probably do your own type of survey. There is some information. There's another portal like this for Spotify as well, but that is information due to GDPR, which is basically Europe, and CCA, which is in California. That kind of oversteps the boundaries of privacy when you get into getting demographic data. So again, if I just click on overview, you kind of see now that we've kind of looked at these different screens. I'm seeing my top cities, my recent episodes. I've got a glimpse of the average consumption. And for me, I think the thing that I'm looking at are my engaged listeners and my average consumption. And then I like to go in and look at the when people were kind of diving off. So, and again, that address, podcasts with an S, podcastconnect.apple.com, and you just log in with your Apple ID. So whatever you use to buy movies or things of that nature, that is the same login you use to get into Podcast Connect. And it's also the same thing you used when you submitted your show. So a couple other things here as we get ready to take some questions. If you have missing podcasts, there's like no data. According to Apple, at least 5 unique listeners must play content from your show within the selected time frame. So we saw where it was 7 days, 30 days, 60 days, to have any kind of metric. So in some cases, you need at least 5 downloads or 5 people. And then automatic pausing. This is one of the things I love about Apple. If a listener hasn't played a show that they follow for more than 15 days, or they haven't played it at any of the last 5 episodes, Apple will pause automatic downloads for that show to stop taking up room on your phone, which is kind of nice. But the great thing about it is some people say, well, do we really know if anybody listened? And while this doesn't ensure that everybody listens, it does help those downloads that are basically obviously getting ignored from downloading. So that's something that Apple will do. And if you're using Apple Podcasts, they have a little pause button there to let you know, hey, you haven't listened to the show in a while. Some resources. I wanted to show this top one, tools.applemediaservices.com. So let me switch back over to, I had it right here. Here we go. That is this website right here. And what's kind of cool is, again, tools.applemediaservices.com. And I can come down here to Apple Podcast, and there's an Apple Podcast toolbox. And I can come in here and actually type in the name of my show. So I'll put in the feed and Libsyn, and hope if I hit search, there it is. So I can say, here's the podcast. And if I click on that, you will see that here it's got, the last couple episodes, but down here, here's my content link. So if I want to promote podcast, that's here. If I want a short link, it's here. If I want to have a player, I can copy the embed code. I can pick what size I want the player to be. So Apple is just giving you a few more tools to help promote your show. And you can see here, I can choose different colors for the button if I want. All sorts of fun ways to play. And then when you want it, you just download the badge, and there's some buttons here. QR codes are kind of fun. So if you're looking at this on a computer and got your phone, if you point your phone at that, it should take you right to the feed in Apple Podcasts. So again, that's tools.applemediaservices.com. And then the other one I wanted to spotlight real quick before we get into Q&A is, and I have to turn off my PowerPoint here for a second. We talked about the importance of titles, and this is just it's headlines.sharethrough. Yeah, that's sharethrough.com. And you can basically just go in here and type a headline, and it will grade it and say, well, this is about a 56. You might want to add this. And it kind of educates you on what makes a good headline. As always, this website is just an opinion. It's your podcast, it's your audience, and you know them better than anybody else. But it is a tool that I've found from time to time that I'm like, wonder how that works. So with that, Andy, let's go to questions.
Yes. All right, so a couple of rapid fire. Going back to the Apple Podcast analytics, what used to be called subscribers and are now called followers. Can you just show folks on the webinar where you can find that information?
You can't. Isn't that fun? You have engaged listeners. You used to have subscribers/followers in Podcast Connect. They have replaced it with engaged listeners. So if you're thinking like me, you are correct. I was not happy to see that go away, but it's not there. So you could
deduce a little bit from the data that is available.
And that's why some people really like now that 7-day figure in Libsyn, because some people are using that as, okay, these are the super fans that are downloading it almost the minute it's available.
Another question going back to episode titling.
Mm-hmm.
The question is, so that I can still separate out my players by season, do I still need to do season 1 - podcast name, season 2 podcast name, etc. in the category field?
In the category, well, in Apple, in Libsyn, I always recommend putting in the information that Apple wants. Why? Because, well, they're Apple and they want it. And it will help basically organize it in Apple Podcasts. So when we go into make a new episode, I think what she's talking about is down here, or he. Yeah, your season number and your episode number. If you look at something, I'm going to guess Serial in Apple Podcast, it will break it out by season number. So that will automatically do it. I don't know. I know some people will put in the episode title at the top. So this is the one that goes to, well, everybody else. The title down here for Apple goes to just Apple. So I've seen people, I know Rob Walsh, I think he does EP, which is short for episode, then he'll put the number. I've seen other people that will, like you said, put the important stuff up front, and then they'll put numbers at the end. This is where, again, there's best practices, whatever you want to do. But I would definitely fill out this information for seasons and episode number. There are rumors that eventually you'll be able to ask the woman in your phone, hey, play this podcast episode number such and such, which you can do with the woman in the tube from Amazon. Siri kind of does that. She's not as kind of accurate as that, but does that answer that question?
I think so, yeah. Thank you. Another question. When it comes to publishing an episode, is there any way to rearrange the order it appears in my podcast page or player? For example, if I accidentally publish episode 33 before episode 32.
Yeah, if I go over, let me switch back to my fake show. I don't want to, Elsie would kill me if I start rearranging things in the feed. That's based on the date. So if I go over to my episodes and I see this one was January 14th, I can simply click on this to edit it, and I could come down here and say, oh, wait, this was supposed to be, and I can just change the release date and click on save. If you're using Libsyn 4, click on publish. And again, it's going to take a little bit of time for that to show up in Apple Podcasts and the other apps. Those are just a mirror of whatever you do in Libsyn, but you can rearrange those by changing the date.
The hyperlinks in the description category. There are some folks that have had trouble using short URLs, and they have had to list the full URL. Do you know if that's something that has changed, or maybe just an error in the past?
That's the first I've ever heard of this, to be honest with you. I've never heard of anybody having problems with links. So I would, well, that's a great question. I would go back to maybe highlighting text and then making that the link. That would be probably the first thing I would try. But this is the first I've ever heard. I mean, I have my ear to the ground all day long and all evening. Most times I've never heard anybody having links with problems in the description. Again, it's the episode description, not the show description. The show description or links will never work in Apple Podcasts.
Gotcha. There are also a couple questions in terms of, this goes back to one of the first comments you made about there are assets that have been updated or uploaded in Libsyn, such as new cover art, new artwork of sorts, but it's not showing up elsewhere, whether that's on Apple Podcast or Stitcher or Overcast or on Overcast. It's actually showing previous artwork. So can you just re-explain kind of why that might be the case?
Yeah, so here with my fake show, this is my episode artwork, which is different than my show artwork, and that will show up in most apps. Overcast, it's a really popular app on iOS. For whatever reason, I love Marco, but he is one of the few apps that are using what is actually called an ID3 tag, which is an information inside the MP3 file. So you'll see here in Libsyn 5, there's an option where it says there's one, populate from ID3. That's where you've somehow typed your show notes inside the MP3 file. And there are ID3 tag tools that do that. To me, not my favorite way of doing it, but down here, there's another one, update ID3 tag. So if I were to click on this and click on save, this image and this description and this title would be written inside the MP3 so that if somebody listened to it on Overcast, that artwork would show up. Almost all the other apps pull the image from the feed. Marco and Overcast are one of the few that still use the image inside the MP3 file. So that might explain that.
Okay. Great. Thank you, Dave.
Yeah, I saw where somebody was asking about going back to that season option. What that does is if you do have seasons, and this is available in Libsyn 4 and 5, if I go back to settings under player, and I believe this is migrated to 5, I can come in here and edit my web player, and it's not migrated to 5 yet. Eventually, you'll be able to pick a category. Oh, no, it's here. I just didn't click far enough. So if you had a category set up as season 1, season 2, you could make a show player. So if I said, hey, here's all, and I have no idea what these are. This is a fake account. But if I picked one, it would only show those episodes that had that category. So where I said that originally that category, if we go back now and look at where that is in an episode, and I said, oh, this is used if you're using, the Libsyn podcast page. Here, there's general. You could make your own category. So you could make a category called season 1 and then have a show player that shows all the episodes and say only show season 2, only show season 3. So that would be another way that you could do that so people could click in and binge on the whole season on one page.
Another question I got is around the author category, and there's a couple different questions from both sides of the spectrum.
Sure.
One being, nobody's ever heard of the podcast hosts themselves. Should they use the guest name instead? Whereas on the flip side, the questions are, somebody has interviewed a number of notable guests. How many names are sort of too spammy to put in that author category?
Well, the author field, when like here, I'm looking at an episode. So if I interviewed, Mark Cuban, I would put my name, comma, Mark Cuban, comma, however many famous people are in this episode. I wouldn't stuff under, if I go under settings again for your show, remember there's show settings and then there's episode settings. So in the episode, you want to put your name because you're the host and anybody else that appeared in this episode. Under show settings, so if I click here on settings, and here again, it's yelling at me and saying, Dave, you're not saving your changes. This was under podcast settings. This is where you typically only put your name. So here I've got author is me. Now, if I had a co-host, if I go co-host Rob Walsh, and it's every week, it's Libsyn all the time, Elsie Escobar. I could put those here as authors / hosts of the podcast. I wouldn't want to stuff these in every episode unless they're on every episode. Does that kind of make sense? One is for the show, one is for the episode. So wherever that guest appears on the episode, that's where you would put their name.
Going back to downloads per user agent, somebody was just asking a couple of questions in terms of what's the difference. And one thing I can explain that is sort of a tough pill to swallow is that what you see in the user agents is nothing that's up to any platform or distribution platform. It's strictly up to the different players themselves, but also up to how Chrome is built and how Explorer is built. And so when you see something like Chrome having 23,000 downloads, there's unfortunately no way to tell anything more than that. And that can be somebody playing a Libsyn player on a website. It could also encapsulate somebody playing a podcast directly in Google search or in a number of other sites that just play directly through the website versus downloading and playing in an app. Whereas you see things like Apple Core Media, Apple Podcasts, those typically consist of Apple products as a portfolio. So you could theoretically really lump all those together, whether that's somebody listening on an iPad versus an iPod versus Apple TV. I don't think you need to worry too much about targeting one versus the other. I would focus on the podcast piece. That's probably going to be about where 90% of all your Apple downloads are going to come from.
Yeah, and there's one thing I want to point out. As much as we're talking all Apple all day today, remember 75% of Europe does not use, and they're much more Android on that side. So I know a lot of people love to promote Apple. I always like to send people to my website where I have a link to Apple, Google, Spotify, and Amazon. And that way, because for me, you will pry Overcast from my cold dead hands. I love this app. I've got it all set up with all my playlists. So I'm kind of loyal to that. So if you just give people one kind of option and they're like, oh, I listen on Spotify, now I've got to go search for you. And for the record, search in Apple and Spotify and some of these apps is not great. If you type in the feed, which is the name of the feed, in some cases it won't show up. You have to type in Libsyn. That's why I like to send people to my website where there is a link. I do see where Claudia asked a question here. Is it better to put the guest in the author field rather than just the title? How about both? I mean, it's going to be, both are searched, but when in doubt, and I'm with Andy. If it's a real famous name, put that towards the front of the title.
So Dave, let's take one more question, and then I know there are a number that we didn't get to, but we will hope to have another session on either this topic again or a related topic where we'll certainly try to address some of these.
Yeah, and my email's dave.jackson@libsyn.com. If you have other ones, or if you want copies of the slides or whatever, I'm happy to hand those out. What's the last question?
So the last question is it a good idea to still do ID 3 tags or not to bother anymore?
That's a great question. Here, this is one of those where there's no officially right answer. For me, I use Hindenburg Journalist. Hindenburg Journalist puts them in. If I put them in, Hindenburg will write them to the actual MP3 file. There are other tools. I know Marco, the guy that makes Overcast, has a tool for Macs. For me, because it takes all of maybe 10 seconds, I still put them in. And plus, I've been putting them in for 15 years, so it's kind of a habit of mine. Yeah, so it's really up to you. If you've got the time, I would put them in. Why not?
Thank you so much, everybody. We're going to wrap now. Really appreciate everybody's feedback and participation, especially some really great questions. Dave, thank you so much for
thanks,
spreading your wealth of knowledge. Thank you, everybody.